All right, so who came to the Women in Tech keynote yesterday?
Identity.
Women in Identity, sorry. Yeah, okay, cool. So this work is closely allied with that, I would say, but you will probably notice that it is somewhat scrappier, and it is, I guess, kind of a deeper dive on some of the issues that they introduced in that keynote. So if you found anything in that keynote of interest, then this is probably a good continuation for that. So as prep for this, I would like for you to think about the last time you put in a good word for someone. The last time you facilitated an introduction or provided a reference or wrote a letter of recommendation or anything of that nature. So, as we heard in that keynote, there are 1 billion people around the world who lack foundational ID documents. So that is to say your birth certificate, your passport, your driving licence, national ID, if you live somewhere that does it. And they're part of a wider 3 billion who struggle to prove who they are, and therefore struggle to access vital services. So organisations that solve this problem will unlock an enormous cohort of new customers and new users. So using the UK as a case study, and specifically Scotland, we're going to delve into the many reasons people end up in this situation, and the barriers they face, and crucially what can be done to fix it. We're going to describe our, as to say Chloe and I, policy and technology work, supported by the Scottish Government, to reform the use of vouching, which I suspect is probably the thing that most of you are here to hear about, as a way of proving who you are, and use that as a stop on the journey to make a truly inclusive ID verification platform that works for everyone, including those 1 to 3 billion around the world who otherwise struggle. So a brief bit about us. We are VouchSafe. We're a scrappy tech for good startup. There are 6 of us right now, soon to become 9. We are based in Peckham in London. It is about 5 miles and a world away from the likes of, say, Buckingham Palace. Here's the view from our office. So you might be able to see St Paul's Cathedral just around there somewhere. Like the BT Tower is in this kind of area. You can see the Shard, the walkie-talkie, the Gherkin. Like, tall buildings are still a bit of a novelty in London, so we like to give them silly names to feel more comfortable around them. But we ourselves are in a building called Peckham Levels, so this used to be a multi-storey parking lot.
Car park?
Car park?
Parking lot?
Multi-storey, what do you call it here?
Many cars?
Yeah, garage. Thank you. So Peckham has a pretty good public transport network, so this place fell out of use. And about 10 years back, this was totally transformed into a community space. 7 floors of offices and studio space for creatives and small businesses like us. And Peckham itself is one of the most diverse places in the whole of the UK. It is bustling, noisy, and we find it very, very pretty. Residents of the area span the entire socio-economic spectrum. And so we are right on the doorstep of our target users and research participants. Our involvement in this work started in July 2023. So we got together a group of some of the best people we've ever worked with and tried to answer some innovation challenges that the public sector organisations in Scotland at the time were putting out for tender. And the Scottish Government, to their credit, understand that identity exclusion is a very serious problem, and they are keen to get it solved, unlike many other governments around the world. And by December that same year, we were here, stood next to a government minister with a camera pointed in our faces.
Looking very uncomfortable.
Yes. It has been quite a journey. So we are a private company, but because we have this unique, close relationship with policymakers, we've been able to move the needle on issues that would otherwise be pretty much intractable. Like, you need to straddle both worlds to do this the way that we're trying to right now. So Chloe and I, we used to be civil servants. These issues were not new to us, but in that world, we very much struggled to make progress for all the reasons that people have been talking about in other sessions at this conference. And again, I suspect that if we didn't have that close government relationship, we would be struggling for a bunch of different reasons. But we feel like we're kind of in that sweet spot where we can make progress. But we're here because we think vouching is finally ready for prime time. So it's been talked about a lot. There's been a lot of research, but we've really stuck our teeth into this problem. So we're here to present what we think is the solution now, rather than just explanations about the problem. So we've built a way to verify people's identities through vouching to a standard that our customers, including governments, agree is equivalent to using a passport or a driving licence, right? That's the crucial part. Instead of needing to buy those expensive documents, and you do need to buy them, at least in the UK, you can use something that we all have, right? Trusted relationships. And we think it's time for this often forgotten method of identity verification to move from the fringes to the mainstream.
So, the problem. We're swapping. So, the problem. Sorry. When it comes to verifying someone's identity for the purpose of accessing vital services, there's sort of three main ways that this is done in the world that we're from. First up, biometrically. So when we say biometric in this context, what we mean is a liveness check, which is then compared to a physical document with a photograph on it, so like a passport or a driving licence. And this is really quick and easy nowadays, thanks to the effort to some of the technologists who are probably at this conference. But obviously it's only possible if you have a photographic ID already. The second is knowledge-based verification, or KBV. So KBV uses information from your credit file, and then it creates questions based on that information. This method doesn't just rely on people having a pretty substantial credit history, but it also relies on them being able to remember exactly what's in that file. So when you opened a bank account, or when you started a credit card, or how much is left on a loan, or God forbid, how much is left on your mortgage.
I don't want to know.
I don't want to know. It also has quite a high failure rate. So in the use cases that we've been researching, it's hard to know exactly what that rate is, but the number we're getting is between 35 and 50%. Generally speaking, people can't recall really specific information about their financial records at short notice. Finally, the third one, vouching. So vouching isn't a new concept. The idea of taking someone's word that a third party is who they say they are is well established. We do it all of the time. We give references. We put in a good word for someone because we know that they're of good character. In the UK, vouching can already be used as a very basic way to prove identity. Previously, it wouldn't give you access to much, but it might have helped you get a foot on the ladder when it comes to accessing services. So, for example, some GP surgeries might have allowed you to register with them, but many wouldn't. And also, when it comes to that type of vouching, there was a list of people who are allowed to do it. They have to be in a very specific profession. So, a doctor, a civil servant, a company director, an airline pilot, or a justice of the peace, say. But in the UK, around 20% of people don't have a passport or a driving licence. And it's worth noting that neither of these things are technically an ID card. A passport shows that you have the right to travel internationally, and a driving licence shows what vehicles you can drive. In the UK, there is no national ID card. It was trialled for a few years, so 2006 to 2011, but there was really fierce opposition from a lot of civil liberty groups. They were mostly pushing back against the idea of there being a national database of citizens as opposed to the card itself. But both main political parties have been really burnt by this issue, and national sentiment remains pretty much the same. So it's very unlikely that a national ID card will ever come into place in the UK. And the cost of living crisis in the UK is making this sort of ID poverty even worse. A passport costs around £108, including postage. A driving licence is cheaper, but if you don't already have a passport, you have to pay more, so it's about £55, including postage. If you do want to get a passport, you need to get it countersigned by a professional, and it's pretty common for those professionals to ask for more money to do that for you. People are being completely priced out. And the problem is bigger than just not being able to afford it. 20 million people in the UK are financially underserved. They will often have thin credit files, meaning that they can't rely on credit reference checks as a form of identity verification. They'll get trapped in a loop of being rejected for loans and credit, and then that having a negative impact on the credit rating that they do have. All of this to say that people without a reliable way to prove who they are, be that through a passport, a driving license, a credit file, are totally invisible to institutions, and they end up paying an invisibility premium. In the context of UK services, this won't just be a financial premium. So yes, these people will be offered higher interest rates on loans and credit cards that they can get, but their health will also be impacted. If you can't register with a GP, you'll struggle to get early care for preventative illnesses. And crucially, this also hurts service providers as well. If you're blind to a big cohort of citizens that you need to serve, then it limits your ability to strategically plan. And you end up providing expensive intervention care later down the line. And this is not charity work. There is just so much you can't do without ID. So many vital services you'll struggle to access. Bank accounts, credit cards, government benefits and services, utilities, housing, employment. And given the news across the pond over the last few days, it would feel wrong for me not to mention it. The 4th of July will actually be significant for us as well this year. It will be the first general election where people will need to bring ID in order to vote. We've done a lot of research into the potential social impact of what we're building at Vouchsafe. Crisis is a fantastic charity in the UK that helps people who are experiencing homelessness. With no fixed address and a reliance on other people to keep their belongings safe, people experiencing homelessness are some of the hardest hit by this issue. But this is not a niche problem. Okay, so there's a statutory requirement for the UK government services to be accessible to everyone who needs them. But they're finding that a solid 1/5 of citizens can't access the services that they need because they can't prove who they are. In other sectors, some organisations are turning away around 1/3 of their potential customers. And these measurements are coming straight from the service's own analytics, so we are pretty confident in them. So I'm just going to take a real quick sip of water, and then I'm going to talk about how it affects people. So we've done a lot of research over the last 6 months. Oh, gosh. I made that so much worse for myself. We've done a lot of research over the past 6 months, and we've had so many poignant and important conversations shared with us. I'm going to share a few of these with you now, and obviously we've changed names to respect anonymity. One participant we spoke to was Louise. She is a single mum who... hang on, this has just opened something else on... Right, there we go. So she is a single mum who's currently looking for work. She is trying to get ID, but she's really struggling. And she'll need to prove her identity in order to sort of get her first paycheck. She doesn't have her birth certificate. It was destroyed by her ex-partner. And this is an experience that's quite common among survivors of domestic abuse. She has been totally priced out of getting a passport. £108 is more than a week of food for her and her little boy. She's currently trying to apply for a driving licence. First, she has to buy a new birth certificate in order to get it, and then she has to apply by post, so that's £65 altogether. She also has to find someone to countersign that application, and her GP asked her for an additional £20. The whole thing has been extremely stressful and expensive for her. Another person we spoke to, Kate. So Kate is a trans student from the US, and she's currently studying in the UK. She found it incredibly hard to open a bank account when she first moved to the UK. despite having many, many forms of identification, so a passport, a biometric residence permit, student visa, student ID card from her university, she could not find a bank that would accept anything other than a UK passport or a driving licence. In the end, she had to find a bank branch on the high street, which is a real struggle, and then take all of her physical ID documents into the bank. And even this wasn't the fix that she thought it would be. So Kate looks very different in her passport photograph, and was challenged repeatedly by bank staff who didn't think that her ID document was legitimate because her appearance has changed so much.
And I have a little
aside
thing for that. Yeah. Does anyone know what this thing is? Anyone come across one of these before? No? Me neither. So this is an international driving permit. And they say, when we were planning for this trip, like we've been doing a road trip from San Francisco all the way around and then back again after this, and we wanted to hire a car, and every single thing that you read in the UK says you must have one of these. No one's looked at this since I got it. We went to the hire counter and we were like, would you like to see my international driving permit? And the guy was like, no, we'll just take the
guy
normal
was like,
one.
I don't even know what that is.
But this was an incredible hassle to get because my driving license has the title MX on it, which is a less common but no less legitimate title. And the guy was like, this seems like a fake driving license to me.
Yeah, he just wouldn't. He had never seen that before. So even when you've got the ID, it's people will challenge you on it in some cases. The final person I want to talk about is someone called Rowan. So Rowan recently registered her intent to marry with her local authority, which is a very cute thing that you have to do in England. She doesn't have a passport, and her driving licence wasn't enough proof of her identity. She ended up needing to bring in her own birth certificate, her mother's birth certificate, and her mother's marriage certificate in order to prove to the council that she was who she said she was. She still doesn't really know why she had to do this. Why are those things better than her driving licence, a form of identity, technically, that has her photograph on it? And it's hard to overstate how common a problem this is. So I've changed my surname, and the name I go by, that you'll be able to find me on LinkedIn by, is Chloe Coleman. But my main bank account is has a different surname. Monday night, when I was checking into this wonderful hotel to talk at this wonderful conference about digital identity, I was asked to prove that my bank card was in fact my own bank card. And when I couldn't do that because my passport has Chloe Coleman on it, I was asked if I'd brought a copy of a marriage certificate with me to the US. So even people with a passport and a driving license are impacted by how traditional ID isn't reflecting how they actually live their lives. We've mapped these user types. There are ones at the top, like Louise, for whom this problem is urgent and it's serious. And then there's folks like Rowan, and I suppose me and you, where this is just, it's frustrating and it's annoying. But we're prioritising building Vouchsafe for the people who need it the most. And in light of our research with our MVP, we are taking aim at the most considerable barriers people are facing when they're trying to verify their identity. So I'll quickly talk you through these. And they are summed up by some quotes from our research participants. So the first one is the cost. It's over £100 for a passport, nearly £70 for a driving licence. And people shouldn't have to choose between their food shop and verifying who they are. Having to know someone who is in a certain profession is a huge issue. In our research, we found that people tend to socialise and connect with people in similar lines of work or life situations as them. Not to mention that no one knows their local commissioner for oaths anymore. And some people are lucky and do have a copy of their birth certificate, but many aren't. For those who don't, it's been lost or destroyed, or in my case, it's stored safely, probably never to be found again. And all of this in the UK is underpinned by a policy. Well, it's not really a policy. It's called the GPG 45, which stands for the Good Practice Guide number 45. It underpins identity verification for the purpose of accessing government services in England, Scotland, and Wales. Because it's guidance, it comes with more leeway in interpretation than if it were law. And there's a feedback loop between practitioners and policymakers, which we're currently sitting in the middle of. Right, stay with me on this one. So, the GPG 45 is made up of 5 elements that are scored individually: strength, validity, activity history, fraud risk, and verification. The different scoring of these elements means that there are 32 possible identity profiles that can be met, and these span across 4 levels of confidence. An identity profile at the medium level of confidence is what a person needs to access almost any government service in the UK. Does that make sense? Are you with me? Great. But don't worry, because out of the 32, I'm not going to talk you through them. Some of them are more interesting than others. In particular, the profiles that we've written down here that only require the fewest pieces of evidence, but will unlock the most doors for people.
The good bit. All right, so here's the plan. Naturally, we want to get the maximum impact with the minimum amount of change to current guidance. And where we can, we want to go with the grain of current practice and standards. But most importantly, we want to be able to move in a common sense way, prove in a common sense way rather, that what we have, what we're building, protects against the same risks to the same degree as traditional verification, right? So, number 1, the need to be in a special job's got to go. Thankfully, this is pushing at an open door. When we talk with policymakers, this tends to meet with broad agreement. Everyone knows that this is not the society that we live in anymore. Until recently, sure, services were offered face-to-face, but that's just not where we're at anymore. Today, you will struggle to find an open high street bank, an NHS dentist. Our social workers are quitting in record numbers. Many people no longer have the chance to build relationships with the people who fill these roles the way that they may have been able to 20, 30, 40 years ago. I personally have never seen the same doctor twice, and most people in my social circle are in that same situation. And if 20 million people are financially underserved, then why are we still relying on credit reference checks as a way for people to prove who they are? As our cost of living crisis gets worse and worse, people are turning more and more to niche sources of credit that often don't report back to the credit reference bureaus. There are, thankfully though, so many other places that we can look. It is very, very rare nowadays that someone goes through life without leaving any digital trace whatsoever. This is some research from Experian. So what you can see here is people's willingness to share various data points about themselves in order to prove who they are and access various services. Users are generally willing to share this stuff if it's in aid of an outcome that they can see that makes sense to them. So you can see utility bills and similar stuff down on the left here. All the way down to social media accounts right on the far side there. Interestingly, I think for our purposes, biometrics are way over there, despite traditionally being considered the gold standard for this sort of stuff. With the support of the Scottish Government, what we're trying to do now is upstream this updated interpretation of the GPG 45 with the aim of making identity verification more inclusive across all their services. And we are well along the process to becoming accredited to the Digital Identity Attributes and Trust Framework, which is the UK's new trust framework for things of this nature. And we're also working on becoming accepted as proof of age. So buying age-restricted products, sure, that's not of any great interest to us, given what motivates us, but all those cards, all those proof-of-age cards are also valid voter ID, which is of great interest to us. And we're also working with the Financial Conduct Authority, who regulates financial services in the UK, to better understand how this can be used to meet like KYC and anti-money laundering requirements. We are doing this work because we genuinely want everyone to have access to the vital services that they deserve when they need them. And we think that we are finally approaching a good solution after far too long. Thanks.
So we do have a couple of minutes if y'all want to do questions. I can pass the mic to you.
Anyone have any questions about this or anything in general? Do you know what?
Hi. So I understand that one of the main issues is that it's expensive to get an ID. And if the state wants people to get an ID and get like basic services, why don't you have like a policy where when someone cannot pay for it, they get it for free? It's a basic human right.
That's really interesting, and I think you've summed it up really well with the phrase basic human right. So a lot of people that we've spoken to, especially from like well-adjusted nations, believe that having a national ID card that is free is a human right because it unlocks so many doors. As we mentioned in the talk, the UK have been, political parties have been completely burnt by this. And therefore offering a free or subsidised passport or driving licence would be incredibly, what's the word I'm looking for? It would just be very controversial.
Yeah, they'd lose the next election.
They'd lose the next election for it. In the real world, what's happening is that things like our Department for Work and Pensions, which gives out job seeker benefits, if they have someone come to them and that person is like, I literally cannot feed myself or my children, they have been known to fund that person getting a passport. And charities like Crisis, who help people experiencing homelessness, have often also purchased passports and helped people through the very long process of getting one, so that they can then use that passport to verify who they are to go and get benefits.
And it's probably worth noting that those documents are then often lost
They
anyway.
are almost immediately lost.
It goes straight to wherever the last one went.
Yeah.
So a digital solution is probably preferable in those situations.
Yeah, and lots of people as well have sort of raised that, well, if people are experiencing homelessness, well, they're not going to have a computer. And actually, people experiencing homelessness are much more likely to have a smartphone than many other things, because all of our government services are online. So they absolutely must have one in order to access any help whatsoever.
First want to say the work you're doing is awesome. I'm really
Thank
glad
you.
you guys are doing it.
Oh my God.
You mentioned working with the FCA.
Yes.
I'd like to understand a little bit about the nature of that work, the timeline of that kind of work, and then if there's been consideration about other regulatory bodies, if you're aware of other similar efforts in other markets, because unfortunately, with American Express, we have to operate with a lot of regulatory bodies, and it's a bit of a mixed bag.
Shall I do this one?
You can take it away.
So the Financial Conduct Authority do what they call tech sprints. So they bring industry partners around challenges like inclusive identity verification, and that's the capacity in which we're involved with them right now. They're actually having a demo day tomorrow, I think. So there'll probably be a press release or something that explains the next steps beyond that. But like the intention for us is the trust framework. It's in beta at the moment, but it will soon become law, and that will be the gateway to it being used in other jurisdictions and other sectors beyond what we've spoken to you here, because those laws are analogous in different jurisdictions, right? So they're all intended to work with each other.
Yeah, but we've not done the research into what it looks like in it's sort of outside of the EU, UK and EU at the moment, but that's definitely something that we want to do. Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
The plan for us, I think, has been like I kind of said it in that slide, but like make it work in a common sense way, because when we went into this, we thought, oh right, like if there's anything that we're doing wrong here, the auditors will surely catch it.
We have been surprised.
Yeah, we've been surprised at like how much we need to assure ourselves first that what we're doing is solid and protects against all the risks. It's not like
because there's no law underpinning it.
This is so new.
Yeah, and it's very new. So cool.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. So
see you in a minute.